morning, everyone. Welcome to the Dharma Talk this morning. It is March 13th, 2022, and I am Laverne Imori with the Buddhist Temple of San Diego. However, this morning I am speaking to you from Honolulu, Hawaii. I'm not sure that you can see in the background, but my family and I have brought my mother home to have her interred with my father at Punchbowl National Cemetery. So aloha. Please join me as I chant the Vandana and Tisaranam, the homage, and three refuges. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Homage to him, the exalted one, the enlightened one, the supremely awakened one. Buddham saranam gacchami, Dhammam saranam gacchami, Sangham saranam gacchami. I go to the Buddha for guidance. I go to the Dharma for guidance. I go to the Sangha for guidance. Namo Buddhas, Namo Buddhas, Namo Buddhas. Please join me in Gassho as I read from Wasan number 69, written by Shinran Shonin. It is difficult to meet true teachers and difficult for them to instruct. It is difficult to hear the teaching well and more difficult still to accept it. Namo Buddhas, Namo Buddhas, Namo Buddhas, Namo Buddhas, Namo Buddhas, Namo Buddhas. Thank you again for joining our Dharma Talk. And today I want to talk about Zenjishiki. Zenjishiki. It's a term that we use in Jodo Shinshu Buddhism. So I'm going to start a little bit by putting this term into context, trying to define it for you. And I'm going to use the words of some noted scholars, including Reverend Dr. Zuio Inagaki. And this is what Dr. Inagaki says. Academic qualifications are not always the standard for determining this question of what is Zenjishiki. My father, Zui Ken, who was also a Jodo Shinshu minister and academic, used to say that a good teacher, Zenjishiki, is scholarly, ethical, and of deep faith. In Shin Buddhism, a good teacher is one who guides you to Shinjin. And he goes on to say, your Zenjishiki could be just a Nembutsu practitioner with no academic background. By far, the most important qualification for a Zenjishiki is that he or she has had an experience of Shinjin. For how can someone who does not have Shinjin lead others to attain it? But he also says, if you are sincerely seeking Shinjin, a casual remark of a boy or a girl of 10 can awaken you to it. George Gattenby is a ordained Jodo Shinshu priest in Adelaide, Australia, and he has a website. It's called The Way of Jodo Shinshu. And on his website, he says that the teacher or Zenjishiki is a good, virtuous friend, someone who brings the Dharma to life for us in their own person. A Zenjishiki is someone we know that we can trust in spiritual matters, a person who enriches our hearts. Such people inspire and encourage not so much by learning or authority as by their presence. their wholehearted attunement to the Dharma that one seeks. We're never expected by the Zenjishiki to suspend our judgment and common sense. They are more an inspiration than authority figures. Shinran Shonin, in his parable of the path, implies that our true teacher is none other than Amida Buddha. Wasan number 69, this is what I recited at the beginning. It is difficult to meet true teachers and difficult for them to instruct. It is difficult to hear the teaching well and more difficult still to accept it. I want to focus on each line of this verse. So I'm going to start with, it is difficult to meet true teachers. And yet it is absolutely, George Gattenby says, the teacher is absolutely vital and indispensable. And I went to a Dharma talk by Nobuo Haneda in Vista. And I asked him the question, is it important for us as Jodo Shinshu followers to have a teacher? And he said, absolutely. He basically said the same thing as Gettenberg Sensei. He said, a teacher is absolutely vital and indispensable. And recently, some of you may have attended this Center for Buddhist Education SOFA series. Reverend Dr. David Matsumoto spoke about his revered teachers, and there were three in his experience that were especially influential on his life. And that was Dr. Haruyoshi Kusada, Reverend Takamaro Shigaraki, and Reverend Jitsuen Kakehashi. Now, these were three academic teachers, professors that he had. And he spoke of them, however, he did speak of their academic or their doctrinal perspectives. But what impressed me the most about Dr. Matsumoto's talk was he really talked about his experience with these teachers, of how they not only taught him the doctrine and taught him from an academic perspective, but really impacted his life, his kokoro, his heart and mind. And so he really spoke about the experience of having met and learned from these teachers. What especially touched me was when he shared his experience when Shigaraki Sensei was last in the US. He and his family and friends had dinner with Shigaraki Sensei. And he said that at one point in the evening, he found that Shigaraki Sensei and his son David were very deep in some kind of conversation. He couldn't overhear what they were saying. But he said that at the next service that he had, he was the presiding minister, resident minister at the Berkeley temple. He said that his son David said the Nembutsu. He said Namo Amida Butsu. Now, David, I think, probably was well into his 20s. And he said that he had been trying to work with David to say the Nembutsu. And David always resisted. Maybe it was one of those, parent-child type of relationships where the child does not want to necessarily learn or do what the parent asks. But Dr. Matsumoto said that his son David recited the Nembutsu, and he said it touched his heart because he felt that whatever it was that Shigaraki Sensei had talked to David about, that's what prompted David to recite the Nembutsu. And so it was those kinds of experiences that Dr. Matsumoto really focused on. And so I would say to you, it's difficult to meet true teachers, but who are your teachers? I think that for all of us today, our revered teachers include Shakyamuni Buddha and Shinran Shonin. Maybe not in person, perhaps, but through their teachings, through the sutras, through their writings, and through the teachings through their teachings that are passed on to us by our teachers. My very first Zenjishiki, or teacher, was Reverend Don Castro at Seattle Betsuing, and he's now retired. But he really introduced me to the Dharma, and we had some wonderful one-on-one conversations. Dr. Matsumoto, he has taught me so much. He is president, I believe, now at IBS. But I really, truly, I took 2 or 3 of his classes, have gone to hear Dharma talks by him. And he is a true teacher of the Dharma, as are many of the teachers and professors that I have encountered during my classes at the Institute of Buddhist Studies. And of course, for those of us that are with the Buddhist Temple of San Diego, our most recent resident minister, Reverend Dr. Kenji Akahoshi. And I have had certainly the opportunity, as have you, to hear many of his wonderful Dharma messages, to read his writings in our newsletter. But I have also been very fortunate to have some wonderful one-on-one conversations with Kenji Sensei. So it's difficult to meet true teachers, and it's difficult for them to instruct. What could that mean? What brought to mind when I read this line of the verse was the 84,000 paths. And if some of you remember the story of when the Buddha first became enlightened, he was encouraged by those who became his first disciples to teach, to share what he had learned. And yet Shakyamuni Buddha was very reluctant, because he said, this is not easy stuff. It's very difficult. And I would venture to say it's difficult because there are so many people with different ways of learning, different ways of hearing, that how could one person teach the Dharma, share the Dharma effectively? And yet the disciples encouraged him, and he agreed. And, we have many, many, many sutras. And I certainly have not even read, very many of them. But sometimes it's very, very difficult to understand what the sutras are trying to tell me. And yet I think that the Buddha, Shakyamuni, was so very deeply awakened that he was able to, when he encountered so many people who came to hear him, he was able to understand how best to share the Dharma with that particular group of people. Wasan number 69 goes on to say, it is difficult to hear the teaching well. In his talk, Reverend David Dr. Matsumoto said, today it may indeed be harder to meet true teachers of the way, and yet paradoxically, we may also have many opportunities to encounter them. And the italics are mine. If we listen with open minds and open hearts, yes, we may meet true teachers. It may be difficult to meet true teachers. We may, however, have many opportunities. However, we will be able to really appreciate what they are sharing with us if we listen with open minds and open hearts. And Wasan number 69 goes on. And more difficult still to accept it, right? It's difficult to hear the teaching well, but more difficult still to accept it. Gatenby Sensei said, it's difficult to meet a good teacher, not so much because there are none available, but because of our closed minds and hearts. Meeting a good teacher is like falling in love. Our self-absorption, our ego is transcended, and we are moved to a new stage and captivated by their spirit and their words. It is indeed difficult to progress or continue in the Dharma without this kind of meeting with either an historical, factual person or a living contemporary. And this, I think, is what Reverend Dr. Matsumoto was saying, is that he met a good teacher, but he had the kind of encounter, the kind of meeting where they were able to touch him, where they were able to captivate him on a spiritual level through their words and through their actions. It is difficult to meet teachers and difficult for them to instruct. It's difficult to hear the teaching well and more difficult to accept it. So I asked you the question, who are your revered teachers? I include my mother. I want to pay tribute to my revered teacher, my mother. Again, we say difficult is it to be born, right? To hear the Dharma. And I am so blessed to have been born to two wonderful parents. My father, who passed away about 30 years ago, who was very patient, very kind, very gentle soul. And my mother, who passed away on July 24th, 2021. I would say that my mother was not so much the gentle, patient person. And I have spoken about her. She and I didn't always see eye to eye in very many things. And so difficult for them to instruct. And so if I were able, and especially in my younger years, to put myself in her shoes, right? I don't think I was the easiest person to instruct. I butted heads with her. I was a good, patient, obedient child, and yet I rebelled in many ways. It's difficult to hear the teaching well. And we all have baggage. We all have baggage with our parents or with other people. And so, and more difficult to accept it. So it's my ego that kept me from hearing what she was trying to teach me. And it was my ego, my self-centeredness, that really kept me from the self-realization that she did teach me very well, because it is what she and my father and many others have taught me to be the person that I am today. So please join me in Gassho with this closing meditation. It is difficult to meet true teachers and difficult for them to instruct. It is difficult to hear the teaching well and more difficult still to accept it. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Thank you, everyone. And again, aloha, and I will see you shortly back in San Diego.